Thanks, Jeff. Okay, awesome. Well, welcome everyone. It's great to see that we're starting to have some folks come into the webinar. My name is Gloria Halley. I'm the Region 2 lead for Expanded Learning Services with the Butte County Office of Education. And I hope you're in the right place because this is a rural after-school programs meeting the challenges. I just want to personally thank Sam P. Hall with Temescal and Associates, who actually set up this webinar for us. And I'm very appreciative of him doing that. I also want to thank Jeff, who's in the background doing all the mechanics of the Zoom call. Appreciate his timeliness on doing that. Also, I want to thank each and every one of you who have taken the time out of your very, very busy schedules and be a part of this community building activity today to really talk about our rural after school programs. You know, it reminds me of Margaret Wheatley. She had a quote that said, "Very great change starts from very small conversations held among people who care." And by showing up, it tells me that you care about these programs. And I recognize some of the folks' names in the chat. And I know from working with you over the years, we may be small and rural, but we're mighty. So I appreciate you being here today. So before I introduce our panelists, I wanted to kind of go over a little bit about what the purpose of this webinar is. I just wanted everybody to understand that the after school and summer programs provide an invaluable resource, especially in our rural communities. These programs have been able to tailor their services and supports to local circumstances, as well as to specific needs of the communities that they serve and the families that they serve. You know, I'm really excited to know that many of our program directors and the site coordinators and the staff, that they all come with exciting ideas to inspire our youth about learning and exploring new areas of interest. Yet at the same time, what we're doing is something significant for parents in that we keep our students in a safe space with caring and supportive adults and mentors. And for these reasons, I think it's important for us to continue to recognize that there may be challenges, but there's also some clever strategies in order to meet the challenges of these rural programs. And you'll hear more about those challenges in just a few minutes from our panelists. I just want to remind everybody that we're specifically looking at these learning objectives. One, that will understand the significance, the importance of after school and summer programs in our rural communities. Two, that will identify some challenges facing our rural programs. Thirdly, that will explore some strategies that are working specific to our programs in a rural context. Fourthly, that will recognize that there's a role for advocacy in supporting our rural programs. And fifthly, that will increase the awareness of additional resources to perhaps mobilize for our rural after-school programs. Having said that, I just want to be able to now introduce our panelists, and I'll start with Cindy Hawes. Cindy is the current ELOP administrator for expanded learning with the Tehama Department of Education, and I'll let her introduce more of what she does in her role and why she's here today. Also, we have James Hall, who's the Director of Student, Family, and Community Engagement for the Lassen County Office of Ed. And let me tell you, he does a lot of things. He has a lot of balls that he's got going up and down. And I'm just so appreciative he made time to do this webinar with us. And my colleague and dear friend, Mara Wold, the Region 5 lead for expanded learning with the Monterey County Office of Ed, and all the support she gives throughout her region, providing technical support. So I'll turn it over right now to Cindy. If you could just give us a little bit more information about who you are and your role with the Tehama Department of Ed.
Okay, good morning. I am here because I am the ELOP administrator in Tehama County. So I am doing the hiring of all of our ELOP people, which is a lot of people, thank goodness. But I also have small school experience as a superintendent principal at a K-8 and also at a large high school in town. Well, not large, but large for our town. And so I kind of have experience with all of the grades, but all of my work experience is rural. I also attended both of the schools that I worked at. So I have a student perspective, a parent perspective, and a superintendent perspective.
Thanks, Cindy. How about you, James?
Well, I have a very long title, which just means you get to do a lot, but it also means that I do have a love for expanded learning programs. It's probably my favorite part of my day, thinking about how we impact kids. All of my work is in rural and frontier sites. We have one rural and the rest are frontier. So it's really fun to kind of think about how that works. I love the advocacy part of it, where we can work to make change so that our students aren't left behind at any point. So that's really, a lot of the time I look in just that brighter future that we're creating for our young people. Thank you, Gloria.
Thanks, James. And I'll just add a little point here because I thought it was the funniest thing is James had me do professional development in a barn. And it was the funniest thing. It was just like, okay, this is rural. I'll never forget that. Thanks, James. Mara.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Gloria. My name is Mara Wold. I'm the Region 5 lead in the System of Support for Expanded Learning for Region 5, which includes the counties of Monterey, Santa Clara, San Benito, and Santa Cruz. And I've been in this work providing technical support, very similar to Gloria Halley's role up in Region 2 and Butte County Office of Ed and other colleagues who are on the line today. And have an extreme passion for the equity piece in servicing not only our suburban and urban, of which my region is the majority, but also making sure that the minority, which for me is our rural and frontier sites, only about 10% of my region is rural frontier classification, but making sure that their voices are equally heard, that there's equitable services provided, and just here is a very passionate supporter and advocate for our rural and frontier. And been in this field for a very long time, over 20 years, and happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And to just give you a context, we have a slide that shows the number of rural programs in the state. So you can see there's quite a few. And then particular attention on the number of students that we serve, over 750,000. It's really important that we recognize that these families need to have the equity that Mara was speaking about and the high engaged learning experiences. So with that being said, I'd like to go ahead and start with you, Cindy. Tell us a little bit from your perspective, what is the significance of after school and summer programs in rural communities? Why are they so important?
Well, I know they were important to me when my kids went, because how do you have a job if you have to pick up your children at 2:30? So that is a huge significance, but also just having a place for these kids to go. These rural schools are not set where there's a city bus system and they can get home. There is no way that anyone from the school that I was just working at can walk home. It's hours. So having a place for the children to get a meal, to get activities, to get their homework done, to be safe is huge. And I try to tell our employees that this is a huge service that you're giving to our families. And the cost is low or free. We figured about 36% of our families are not paying for SURF themselves. And then we also have several districts who are paying for SURF for everyone. So it's very significant. And we hear all the time, because we have waiting lists, I'm going to have to quit my job. If I don't get my kid into SURF, I can't work. So very significant.
Thank you, Cindy, for that perspective. I think that's important, especially what you said about the parent, how it impacts them. James, what about you? From your perspective, having been a program director for a number of years, tell us what the significance in these programs are.
Well, I think the biggest significance, I used my own program. My kids all went through our programs. And one of them now works in our program. Yeah. As a program leader, and two of them work as our pals in the buddy part of our program. So it really has played, and I get to hear often from our students how important it is for them, because otherwise they would either be on their street or they would be trying to make their way home or sitting at the school waiting for their parents without any supervision. And they often say, I love that I get to have somewhere that someone cares about me, and that they get to learn new things. We've had kids that are sewing for the first time. We've had kids that are using a microscope and becoming a person working in a lab for the first time. Those aren't things that are available in our communities. If they want to become a farmer or a rancher, we can hook them right up. But when we think about those broader horizons, we don't have them. And so our programs get to bring that to them, and open their eyes to those. So I think that plays that significance, but also for our families, is we're their hub. We are the ones that tell them how their kid was doing all day. We take the brunt as well, but I think the other part is that we know that students are safe, that they're in a caring, loving environment, and that their needs are being met. Also in that social emotional piece, when they don't have a connection, our staff are a lot of times their connection. And so I think that, we play such a vital role versus a kid just saying, I don't connect to anybody. I have that opportunity to do that as well. So I think it's kind of a cool way for us to not only impact them with the education part, but also in their personal part, and helping them grow into greater adults.
I love that. Thank you, James. Mara, let's hear from you, the significance of these programs.
Well, I certainly would echo everything that Cindy and James just said, because I think expanded learning has such the potential of helping to nurture really positive, contributing adult members of society in so many different ways. And I just would like to add, in addition to what they have already stated, is the importance of after school and expanded learning as a resource for those families who have been displaced. And we even saw this during COVID, of course, when expanded learning played a huge role in making sure that our students were still engaged during a time that was very traumatic for so many of our young people, and not being able to actually go to a physical location. And yet staff were out and continued to remain connected to families. And I would also add, just recently with wildfires and with atmospheric rivers and storms and you name it, we've really been hit hard in Region 5. And I know this gets into the challenges a little bit, but I just want to talk about how it's been a benefit. Expanded learning has been the constant for so many of the families that were displaced. For example, when the Pajaro levee broke, and we still have 50 families who've been displaced in rural agricultural community there, who've been accepted and embraced with open arms. Expanded learning has been that constant for them, that they have a place to go, that they're safe, and that they remain engaged. And this has really been in part because of the collaborative effort to make sure that those opportunities still exist for kids who've been impacted. So yeah, go ahead.
I think the other part of your question was about summer. And we, for the first 2 years now, have run summer. And we're seeing huge results from our students, as Mara was talking about. Sorry, Mara, I didn't mean to, hopefully didn't cut you off.
No, you didn't. Go ahead.
But I was really thinking about that summer piece and how it really, in our community, we were the summer activities for them. There aren't other activities. We are those activities. And, just hearing from those students, I think that's the other part about it. It's just that, yes, it's a longer school year, and yes, they're longer days. But for those students that are in those programs, they don't realize that they're actually at school learning, or even disguised learning, or exploratory learning, or whatever we're going to call it. But they really are benefiting greatly from those extra days and that extra support, I think, for them. And the meals. They're getting to sit with other people and have a meal versus just a brown sack lunch sitting on their table that their parent picked up on their break, if they could get to the school.
Yeah, I heard that so often in our region, to connect your point with Cindy's point earlier about how parents would say if they didn't have this service, they would have to quit their jobs. And that is so especially true in summer. And there's a lot of gratitude out there among our families and community members for the service that this provides. It's so much more than babysitting. And yet we also know the reality is that if they don't have a place to go, where would they be?
Yep. And I can just piggyback on that I was amazed this summer at all of the things I was hearing, I know that we put on an amazing program that was fun every single day. In fact, one of the comments from the facilitators was, can we do a little less last year? We didn't get to be on campus and plan fun things because everything was so big. And the kids had an amazing summer. And it was really fun to watch them and see their excitement. But you're right, those parents, they were so thankful just to have their kids have a place to go, and that they were coming home saying, hey, this is cool, I want to go back.
Aw, that's a testimony right there, right? Oh, great. Well, thank you. So now let's look at some of the challenges faced by our rural programs, and especially as it may impact the program's effectiveness or sustainability. What are those challenges? One that comes to my mind right away is transportation and staffing. So what are you seeing out there? James, we'll start with you. Oh, go ahead. Take it on, Mara. Take it
Go ahead,
on.
Mara.
I am really passionate about this one. And I think and you know this, I think everyone on the call knows this. And again, I go back to my opening remarks about equity. And I think what I found so challenging as I've been learning and going out there and visiting our rural and frontier programs is that, especially with ELOP, you know, those who have ELOP only, and we need to remember ELOP only is a minimum grant of $50,000. So just to give you a real concrete example and perspective, I do have a rural site that is a total student population of 25 kids. 25 kids in the middle of nowhere. And they have a minimum grant of $50,000, and yet the same requirement in terms of number of days that they have to serve throughout the year. And so this to me is huge. It's a huge challenge, and it's a huge equity issue, because having those same exact requirements of 180 days during the school year and then 30 additional non-school days, so that's 210 days throughout the calendar year of programming on $50,000, and having that be the same requirement as those urban districts that are receiving millions of dollars, not to mention the additional funding that they receive from other supplemental sources. It's just really, to me, it's not okay. And I know I've taken the opportunity to try to get this conversation going early on when ELOP first got rolled out in 21-22, and raising this as a concern. And one big one was a worry among our rurals and frontiers. Well, what if I'm not able to make that requirement, and the proportionate penalty is going to be such that is it going to be more than what I've been allocated? And, you know, so these concerns were very, very real for people. You know, not only can you not hire a full-time person, but you don't have any money for transportation, extra field trips, meals, materials, you name it. So I'll start with that one and let my colleagues add on.
I am totally feeling that, especially as the ELOP person, you know, I am seeing the differences in what schools got. And we do have a school just like that in the middle of nowhere with about 20 kids. And the transportation alone is a huge barrier. You know, if they're required to do transportation, I don't know how they do it, but also it's very hard to staff that site because no one wants to go out there. So we have people now who live out there, but what happens when they retire or find another job? It's hard to get a student assistant out there unless there's someone who lives out there. So definitely. And just the staffing in general is such a huge challenge. We don't want wait lists. We're not supposed to have wait lists, but the schools who have a lot of money are saying, can you hire more? Can you hire more? And we're saying, sure, find them. You know, we can hire them, we can put the kids in there, but we're also finding this year, which is interesting, that people are really feeling like they can kind of pick and choose. Well, I'm only available on Tuesdays and Thursdays, or I can't come in till 4, or all these. It's really hard to keep track of it. And I don't know if how that changed, where you used to get a job and they said, you're working these hours and you say, okay. That doesn't seem to be the case. And plus maybe it's our fault. We're so desperate. We're saying, okay, we'll make it work. Come in at 4. We'll cover. So, yeah, I agree with that.
Those are definitely the reality that we all face. I mean, I think that's the commonality in that. We can't grow people. Just go out and pick them off the tree and say, hey, we have new people. And they don't want to work full time, or they have reasons why they can't show up when they're supposed to every day. And have a lady in our office say, why are you so accommodating? Well, I don't have a choice. It's not a choice that I'm sitting there going, I want to accommodate these people's needs, but I also don't want the program not to be for those students. And so I think it's that creativity that tends to shine brightly in the rural and frontier areas, because we know the value of the program and the families know the value of the program, and how hard are we going to work on that. And I think the other part is that as we think about it, sustainability with $50,000 isn't going to really be sustainable if someone stays longer than the year that they're the first year, because most of them are going to get a step increase or whatever benefit comes with that. And by the time you're hitting yourself coming and going. And if they work that PERS part of it, that's a huge cost for a lot of them. For a lot of our programs, when it's 27% of their money or higher, that's a huge hit to those budgets just to have staff members, let alone having to create all of the programming, because it doesn't just naturally exist somewhere. And I think for me, that's a really huge issue. Transportation is another big issue of getting them to the location. But I think with those two coupled, it makes it difficult to think about sustainability in the future, because those dollars just shrink because of those outside demands on those dollars that they're experiencing.
And one more little piece, when not only do we have staffing, issues, but when we need subs, they don't exist. When we get a sub, if they like it, then they get into a position and then we have no sub. So the subbing and it's that way everywhere for schools, for after school program, but definitely worth mentioning.
Yeah, and I was going to mention the exact same thing, and I just heard yesterday that one of our programs actually had to close unexpectedly. There's 2 staff members at this site. They both were sick. Wow. So what do you do in those types of situations when the reality is that you're so short of folks who can step in with no sub list? And when you've got principal and superintendent, and Cindy, I'm sure you can speak to this in your former role, but just the bandwidth issues of leadership, where the principal superintendent is not only doing those duties and administrative duties, but also is sometimes the bus driver and sometimes the HR manager and
the cook,
the food service, right? Food services. So, I think these are the realities and the challenges that really do need to be brought to light, because it's really about human capacity and having compassion and having empathy, and really hopefully helping folks to understand that the reality of our rural and frontier is so very different than the challenges. Not to say that there aren't any in urban and suburban areas either, but they're different, and they need to be acknowledged, and those in maybe even our larger districts need to hopefully be a voice and support for our rural brothers and sisters as well.
Thank you, Mara. One of the other challenges I didn't hear brought up, but I'd like to see if you've encountered this, is with the internet connectivity. Because when we talked about, just get them in front of a screen, does that work for you in rural communities?
No.
Some of you may recall the Taco Bell. Do you remember during COVID, there was a family, it went viral. There was a family in Monterey County that would drive out to a local Taco Bell, to get access to Wi-Fi. And
Oh.
that's one of the pictures and images that really brought home and brought to life the fact that our rural communities have such a serious infrastructure issue with reliable internet. And James, I hope I didn't interrupt you. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you did not. I was gonna just mention the same exact thing. In a lot of our areas, it doesn't exist, or if it is there, it's very spotty, and you're not gonna watch a video or connect to a live anything. You know, they're like, we were gonna go to the zoo trip today. Well, they can't even see the zoo because it splits up and then it goes off and it shuts down their computer. So I think it's, those are things that it's wonderful to think about, but that broadband usage definitely a problem in lots of those areas.
And in our area, for my specific little school, I did get on the phone with, I'd bought, I think 50 hotspots thinking, oh, this is the answer. So then the parents are bringing them back. These don't work. So I spent 2 hours on the phone with that company and they said, we're sure we can make this work. Why don't you give me some addresses? Every address I gave them of where oh no, we don't serve them. No, we can't serve them. So it did us no good. They didn't refund the hotspots either, but we tried and we were required to provide this internet service and we could not do it.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the reality though, right? And that's why I thought it was important to bring up. And I'm sure the participants who are going to be asking questions and providing hopefully some answers at the end of the webinar will also bring to light some other issues that are challenges for our rural programs. Having said that, I'd like to go ahead and go into the next question. So I know you are all very clever and always have some ingenious ideas. So what are some strategies that you're aware of that have been tailored specifically to the rural context to address some of these unique challenges?
For us, we have done a lot of work with the Sheriff's Department. And it started with COVID when we needed to get information and packets to our students in some of our rural areas. They were the transportation. And to this day, they're still there. They still do some of our transportation out to some of our sites. And then they stop in, they visit with them, they talk to the kids. They have created their own relationship with those kids. And so they're pretty much invested into our programming, and they actually talk about how they can, what can we do to help these kids actually make it through the programs and get to the programs or get home. Or we had one that he's like, I'll drive the kid home if that's what it takes for the kid to stay. I mean, they have done everything in their power also to join us. And so it's been kind of fun to see how that partnership has grown for us with our county sheriff department.
I love that. I love that so much. Thank you, James. Other strategies?
So as far as the hiring strategies, we in the Department of Ed, that we have a, and you do too, a para test, para educator, they have to take a test. So we've created a flyer with both an ELOP and a regular after school position and highlighted the differences, the pay, the hours, all of this. And when they're doing the tutoring for the para test, I pop in very excitedly and push these and say, hey, you could do this, because a lot of these para educators who work at a school, they can't make it on 6 hours a day. So if they can work for us also, it's a win-win. They make it, we have employees, and they can work more than 8 hours a day because they're employed by 2 different entities. I don't actually know how successful it's been, but we just have to keep trying.
That's clever, Cindy. Thank you.
And
Mara, what are you hearing?
Yeah, I would just add that we had one rural program that had so much resistance from the core day teaching staff until she really sort of changed the narrative and the perspective to what is it that we want to do with our youth? What are you passionate about? What do you get excited about? Something maybe that you've never done, that you've always wanted to do with youth. And the superintendent said when she changed that perspective and how she actually framed engagement with the expanded learning program, a whole new world really opened up for her in terms of teachers really wanting to do something and to participate. And so I think because it's sort of human nature. We think, oh, wow, we have all these barriers. Oh, they're insurmountable. It was really about looking at the asset that they had before them. They had this opportunity that they didn't have before. And how do we look at it as a real positive thing and do our very best to provide support services to youth and families in our communities? And just that change opened the world for this particular district to actually hire on enough core day teachers to be able to do some really innovative and creative things. And I will say that this particular rural site also is blessed to have some ACES after school funding as well. And not a huge amount of dollars, but enough to be able to sort of pool their resources together to prioritize some field trips and partnering with additional resources that they had. So they were leveraging some other supplemental dollars that they had to really provide one or two very unique, amazing opportunities for students. And it was a lot of youth voice engaged in that. It was teacher input, parents, and community input in terms of what kinds of experiences do we want to have for our youth. Many of them had never seen the beach, for example. And so for them to be able to take a trip to the ocean and see the ocean was really quite remarkable. And they still to this day talk about the impact that field trip had. And I know that we have our challenges with transportation, but it was a priority that the community said, we've got to get our kids out to see the world. And how are we going to make that happen? And then so figuring out ways that they could do some fundraising coupled with additional funding sources and, their ACES and ELOP, et cetera. So it was this sort of blending and braiding and compiling of dollars to allow that opportunity to happen for young people. And what a difference it made, what a difference it made.
We have two agencies or groups, I guess. One is Tehama Reads, and we base our theme of the summer off of their book in common. So this last year it was about bees. It was The Way of the Hive. It was a graphic novel, which was different and exciting for the kids and the teachers also, because they learned, how to use a graphic novel academically. So everything was about bees. We never really said I want to be something without saying I want to be. I mean, it was just ingrained in all of us. Wonderful t-shirts, yellow with bees. It was a great theme. In Orland, there is a bee museum. They came to us to 2 sites and actually did a wonderful program, hands-on with our students. So that is one organization, Tehama Reads, that really helps us plan and guides our summer. And then there's Expect More Tehama, which is it started off really quite small with a group of people who were concerned about where are our kids going after they graduate from high school, and what can we do to help give them experiences and all of this. And they publish a summer guide that students can get that has all kinds of ideas for families to do things, because sometimes maybe a family does have time off, but they don't have the money to go, on a big Disneyland trip, but they could go to Bernie Falls or they could go somewhere that's close. And this pamphlet gives them ideas about that. That's just one thing Expect More does. It's a really great organization that's just growing all the time.
Yeah, Cindy, you reminded me that the relationship and collaboration with our state parks, state and regional parks is a huge, huge resource in our community. And oftentimes our more rurals are very close to some beautiful parks in the area. And so that's a tremendous, tremendous resource.
Mm-hmm. We do have a site that is closer than any of our other sites to Lassen Park. And one of the parents is a ranger. I don't know if it's at that park, but they come in and do things with our little school. And I've been there a few times when the kids are doing an activity, and it just makes it more special. Instead of the same old after school people, you have an expert now and that's my mom, so it is great to have those partners.
Yeah. It definitely outside partners, and I know we'll add the resources into the chat. So your regional, statewide parks, even parents and other community members who might be in the area with a particular specialty can also be a great source to look at the staffing issues. And I would say too, local high school students who live in the area who may be coming back home can be employed in the after school programs as well. And I know that there are some parameters that we have to be careful, of course, with age restrictions of 18 or older, the flexibility that our ELOP programs now have to potentially rework and rewrite a job description for an instructional aide.
Yep.
That can provide some flexibility, I think, to meet some of the challenge. It's one very important strategy, and then also helps you to build a homegrown workforce for teachers in the future.
The only thing I was going to add on this is that, again, given the benefit of coming together to collaborate, and one of the things that came out of doing this years ago was the whole emphasis on transportation. And what that eventually yielded was our frontier transportation dollars. And I know that Region 2 gets the lion's share of those dollars because we have the most rural programs. But that has been very instrumental throughout the region here. And I'm just grateful, again, it came together because there was a small group of folks who cared and was really advocating for that. So those are strategies that we can continue to work on and grow as well. So anything else, or we can go to the next question? Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next question. So this is where it goes into advocacy. It really requires that we come together to be stronger. And what is those, in your mind, what does that role of advocacy to support our rural after school programs look like?
Well,
From where your vantage point. Go ahead, James.
When we were facing some challenges before with those frontier sites, we leveraged time with our legislator that lives in our, actually their child attends one of our programs. And that's how we got the reduced attendance, the reduced day for our frontier sites in the state, to lessen that burden for them. And it was not initially, though, met with much enthusiasm. Because it brought about what they thought was an inequitable lens. The interesting thing that we have since found is that as we look at that, it's the same going forward. The equity, those dollars aren't coming to those sites. They're expected to do, as Mara mentioned, and I think in our first question, they're expected to do the exact same thing as everyone else is, with limited or no resources outside of there. They have no real community to gain other resources from. And we're talking about 81 sites at this current time. We were doing it before, it was about 99 sites that were focused in on that frontier piece. And as those came to fruition, it was the grassroots that got the work done. It was the stories that we could tell from everywhere in the state. We tried to gather, and you helped us a lot with that, gathering stories not only from Region 2, but trying to gather stories all the way down to San Diego area, trying to get those stories, the stories from the coast, the stories from the north, the other part of Region 1, trying to get those. All of those stories were the stories that were told. And at the end of the day, it was the story that we had fed to the legislature that stood up and read the actual stories to the people in the assembly and in the Senate, and they told them, this is how this works. What you're voting on is really about people. Yeah. But we had real stories, and they had a real experience. And I think as we talk about the advocacy piece, we have to tell our story.
Mhm.
because a lot of the stories are the stories of the urban and suburban California stories. But we have to be good about telling our story and showing up in those spaces and really, not being a bulldog about it, but really just talking. Because what we'll find too is that we're also more alike than we are different.
Mhm.
A lot of the rural programs could benefit from a shorter day now. There was a lot of those pieces of work that could really, if we were strategic about it, it could roll over and actually be more beneficial, as there's no way to increase dollars, but we could take an hour off of the day. It still would meet the needs of those families. It would meet the needs, but at some point we're going to have to do that kind of advocacy. Once again, because the dollars are going to shrink, but the need is still there. And the inability to gain more dollars is also a problem.
Mhm.
A lot of them don't have a high enough free and reduced lunch count to be in the tier where they're getting more money, or the amount of students to even matter if they got into a higher free and reduced lunch price meal. And so I think it's just kind of one of those pieces that we have to really remember, that we're as strong as we are as a group, and our voices and our stories make the difference, because we can see those things shift for rural and frontier programs. We can see those changes happen. It does take a long time and a lot of work and mad people. We faced a lot of adversity, even from CDE at that time. And so I think as we think about this advocacy piece, it's okay to still be advocates, because we're advocating on those kids that don't really have the strong enough voice, or their parents don't even know how to do it to assist, but they were able to write letters and tell us stories and share. So I think it's important that we not forget that even though we might be dealing with the smaller population in the state, there are still people that want to know their story and will sponsor legislation and support in that as well, as we continue that advocacy work. But if that's our job, is to continue to advocate for every one of those students that are in that process.
Well said, James. Thank you so much.
I can piggyback on that a little bit, just because your comments are so rich, and there's so many good points in there, James, that I want to piggyback on. I'll just say this, that I think it's really important that we find allies within our big districts.
Yep.
I just want to give you an example. We have grant manager meetings in my role as a TA support person. We meet all the time. I never am excluding rural from the conversation. And I even had a large district say, I wish I could give some of my money to them.
Mm.
And so what happened in this process, I mean, that was a very heartwarming thing for them to say within this network meeting. But the point is that we talk about expanded learning and our support to our youth and families as one community, as a collaborative regional community, as a collaborative statewide community. And so when we're sharing the stories of the rural experience, it's so important that story be told in the urban and suburban settings as well when we can. So one huge advocacy role is, if anyone out there also has large metropolitan areas within their regions, to have rural be a part of the urban and suburban conversation, because that helps develop more champions within the community, more people like my large urban who was like ready to give away their money to help support those in need. That's a real thing. That, to me, that's very powerful, because it means that we're going to have more advocates for the rural experience and the rural story. So I agree with the flexibility piece that you talked about, James. That there's some pieces that I think we do absolutely need to advocate for our rural and frontiers in terms of greater flexibility. It's not always about the dollar, but I would say this: there does have to be an increase in the minimum.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. There has to be a two-pronged approach to this, and that is understanding that the rural experience may look and feel very differently. You may have a greater need during summer, for example, than you might during the course of the year. Individual needs of the individual districts and the rural communities is going to vary. And it's so important to have the opportunity to have the flexibility to provide programming that meets the needs of families. Because if it's a cookie cutter approach, nope, 180, 30 additional in this hour requirement, I don't know. It just limits, it creates a barrier where perhaps a barrier doesn't need to be there.
And I think even the ability for communities to do what's best for their community is a struggle at this point. Because in some of the early language, it was, oh yeah, we're going to work at your local community will have a say. And as it's rolled out, those have been taken away more and more, where that, they say, hey, you know what, we really only need a 6-hour program all summer. Okay, well, why can't we do that? The students are still showing up, they're still getting the dosage. And I think so there's been a lot of frustration around those concepts, because we say it's a local decision a lot of the time, yet then we're so prescriptive, and the districts don't always have the money to backfill what we don't get. And as your story of the largest, I get the privilege to be the co-chair of the California After School Network leadership team. And so I'm with people from all over the state, and it's always interesting when you meet those members, even from LA, and they'll say, I wish I could just give back to the rural programs. We're sending money back, but it doesn't get to go back to a rural program. I wish we could designate, hey, I'd like to adopt a rural program. They're like, we're sending back money, and it's like, there needs to be those kind of conversations, because they are getting it and understanding that they do have the lion's share of the dollars, but they also have that other part that, every kid wins in California. And I think that's the other part of the work that we look at. So
yeah, and I know, Cindy, I want your voice
me
to
too.
be in here too, but one just final point on the funding piece, because this just recently changed, of course, with the ELOP allocations for 23-24. But if you're less than 75% free reduced price meal percentage, you just lost $251 per kid.
Yep.
And then nothing happened to those above 75% who are eligible for all kinds of additional LCFF supplemental funding, title. I mean, the list goes on, right? So again, going back to equity, how do we take a look at this as a holistic picture with what the needs are of our smaller rural and frontier communities? So Cindy, chime in.
Mine is kind of a different perspective, which I think we want. And that is, when I look at this question, I cannot emphasize the importance of the relationship between the after school staff and the administration and school staff, because we are in their classrooms and we are on their campus, and they're all our kids and they're all their kids too. And we have to be a family about this. So we do have sites where the districts are allowing their staff to start working for us on minimum days. Within, they're paying them, but yes, they can shift over and help you with sign in, because you don't have anybody who can be there on a minimum day. But when I look at schools that have a really great relationship with the principal or superintendent principal, things are so much easier, rather than fighting all the time for the space and for, whatever it is. They've helped with transportation. I just think that is super important for everyone to know, that that's a good relationship to have.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And we'd like to continue to foster that. And some of the ways that I know Mara and I have been trying to foster that is with our relationships with CISC. I actually report quarterly to our CISC here in the North State. And also Mara has brought up SECESA, which is no longer called SECESA. So Mara, tell us a little bit more about that group.
Yeah, and so CISC, for those who may not know, stands for Curriculum and Instruction Steering Committee. So this is your educational leadership unit, which exists all up and down across the state. And they have something called the CISC Symposium, which is happening, and then I'll get to the CISESA in just a moment, Gloria, but the CISC Symposium, I'll take advantage of talking about that a little bit here, is a really phenomenal opportunity for us to get our stories told and make important connections between expanded learning and the regular school day, because predominantly you'll have directors of curriculum and instruction there. You'll have assistant superintendents and superintendents who attend this symposium. It happens to be in Monterey County, upcoming on February 21st through 23rd. And then in 2025, it will transition to Southern California. And we were talking earlier about one of the challenges too, with going to symposiums like CISC, is that for many, they can't afford, a lot of our superintendents or even staff of our rurals can't necessarily get to these conferences. That's another hurdle or barrier. I would go back to what I said earlier about how can we champion our larger district advocates to make sure that our rural voice is there and present. And Gloria and I have had the opportunity to present at CISC and share these stories. And again, that's a really vital role that for those of us who have the opportunity to be able to go to some of these events, to make sure that we are speaking loud and proud and telling those stories that James talked about. So CISESA changed its name to just the California County Superintendents Association. That's another really important group that meets monthly. And there are advocacy groups out there for us for expanded learning. The Partnership for Children and Youth runs something called CA3, Afterschool Alliance, for their local issues. When they hear from us, they're very good about making the connections either to the California County Superintendents Association or to our local legislators to really try to push policy forward that will really help benefit our programs. And I think they are understanding for sure. I know they're hearing from me, I'm sure they're hearing from Gloria and others, the importance of the Rural Frontier Challenge. Because again, some of the initial changes to legislation and cleanup was really sort of dictated a lot by some of the larger LEAs, and unintentionally, but that was sort of the priority, is looking at some of the larger as well as CBO organizations that are a part of the CA3 Alliance. And so getting, again, the rural voice out there on behalf of our local educational agencies that are small is a really, really vital role that we have to play as local champions for our areas. So.
One other one that I'll put out there is a Small School Districts Association. I know I've been working very closely with Tim Taylor. He's no longer the executive director. There's someone who's interim, but I think, again, that's another audience, another advocacy role that we could play with the Small School Districts Association. So putting that on people's radar, I think, is really important. Another group is also the California Rural Education Network, and that's actually run through our Butte County Office of Education, we will be putting out a web link to, they're looking for additional voices. And when I talked to Rindy, she was very excited that we would increase perhaps participation from expanded learning. So that is another group that I think we should look to in terms of advocating for our rural programs.
Gloria, I do love that Cindy was talking when she was talking about that relationship with the school boards. Those are those foundational relationships. Yeah. Those are the ones that that's the best advocacy dollars we could spend of our time, yes, is building those relationships. Because that's really how it begins to affect our students. Mm-hmm. The quickest are those positive relationships that we do build. So I think, thank you, Cindy, for bringing that up, because that really is probably our first and most important piece of advocacy that we can do.
Agree. And another opportunity coming up here actually next week is Lights On.
Mhm.
after school, which is the National Day of Advocacy. And so events and open houses, all kinds of exciting things will be happening on Thursday, October 26th. But this is also a really phenomenal opportunity to have an open house and to really share with local elected officials and your statewide officials what's happening within your rural communities. I know we are still hoping perhaps to have our state assembly speaker, who happens to represent the Salinas Valley, try to get him out to our local area. And even though he may be participating in a more urban or viewing a more urban program, it's still an opportunity to build that relationship and then talk about the other districts that represent rural and frontier in that same conversation. So again, take larger, but have the larger also be able to speak and advocate for those in rural and frontier settings, because those elected officials represent all of us, and they need to hear and see those stories too.
And Gloria, I love that Julie posted in the chat. She said that she's been serving on the CA3 and their LEA advisory group as a rural voice. I think that's amazing. Just because those rural voices, as we can get them in those different places where it doesn't feel like rural is represented, it's people that, it's when people say, oh, I can give a little bit more time and do that work. So I think that's amazing. I didn't know that. I'm excited to learn that.
Thank you, Julie. That's good for us to know. And
You're
talk to you
welcome.
we'll talk to you in a little bit.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so our last question, what can be done to enhance the resource mobilization for our rural programs? Again, thinking about what are some ideas for building sustainable financial models. So I'd like to turn this over now to the panelists. What are your thoughts on this?
Something that we just had a meeting about with our mental health and wellness team is that the universities, one, and we're trying for another, it can possibly, we're in the beginning stages, provide us counseling interns for our summer program, because we had a huge social emotional need this summer, huge. And we did have people there, but to know that we would have them the whole time and to plan ahead would be fantastic, especially if they could put an intern at a site for the whole summer. And then we have the same person and it's consistent for the students and they just get some support and the staff get some support. So that was something that just came about to us that is pretty exciting. So for one idea.
I like that. Others?
I think going back to the elected officials and getting the word out. I've been thinking too about the California After School Network has their after school challenge, after school and summer challenge, which occurs in March of every year. So I'm not sure what the dates are of that for 2024, but I do think that is a really important opportunity for us to get in front of our local legislators and tell the story. So I guess my mind really goes there, in part because I do think, again, we've got to resurface some of the equity issues with the funding and really have that be a top priority. And it's very exciting to see that Julie sits on the LEA advisory group to serve as that voice for rurals, because having that lower and if you look at ELOP, just ELOP, and having the less than 75% free reduced price meal LEAs have the fluctuating rate potential year after year is very scary for a lot of people when you are not going in with any certainty really from year after year. Things can change. We know that it's built in for those who are above 75%. There is a 3-year guarantee at their rate, which is much higher than what our smallers are receiving. So, looking at those things that might be areas we may want to prioritize for legislative change, I think is such a really important first step. And making sure we have a collaborative conversation around that to prioritize.
I'm also concerned about, I mean, ELOP funding, if it goes away, but the requirements stay, I don't know how schools will do that. I don't know how county offices will be able to provide that. The grants that we are getting, the ACES grant, it's not enough to do all the ELOP also. I mean, I just did the MOUs for our ELOP, and it's a lot of money that these schools are paying to enhance, this after school program. So if the money does not stay, there's going to be a problem. So I think we really, really need to advocate for that. Not that I'm hearing it's going to go away, but we also, I don't think, anticipated the change in the funding this year. There were a lot of our districts who actually got a little bit more money, but most of them got less, unless they were at that $50,000 mark and they just got the same.
Mhm.
Yeah, and thankfully we were able to, I think, advocate and have some success in making sure that part of the cleanup legislation included the provision that said that our smalls will not be billed in excess of what they're funded. And that took advocacy. That was something that we really worked toward, and that's a first step. So I know that there is some positive change that can come about with the power in numbers, as Julie says, and being advocates for what we want to prioritize and what we want to see done.
I think we also have to continue to be creative in braiding funds. So many of the funds that are received are eligible to be used after school and in summer. And the problem is that we're not always in the room or at the table, but as we've built those relationships across the board, we've gotten dollars from places we never thought possible to get a dollar from. When they're running into a problem, they're like, oh, we'd love to do X, Y, and Z for your program. Well, that was because we built relationship with them. It took a little bit of giving on our part of our time and really we'll help you. And then at the end, there was a great reciprocal relationship that was built. And I think that's one of the important parts. It's all about the relationship with everyone. I always laugh because Gloria will say, oh, I met this person and I did this. And then the next thing you know, here's a new initiative or something that she's sharing. Well, I think those are because it's that spirit of, oh, I know what my programs do. I give my elevator speech, and then I'm able to also say, and I would love to learn more about your organization and see how we might be able to work together. And I think we have to remember in the frontier and rural, don't be shy. People want to help you. And so I think we really have to think about that piece as well. I think the other thing that I always tell the sites here is, get ready because attendance is coming. Unless this goes totally different than ACES did, give us 2 more years and we'll all be doing attendance and having to submit that same report and doing all of that work, because people soon want to know how are you measuring your success, and enrollment's not enough. And so I think we really have to start that conversation now, especially from the rural lens, is if that were to happen, are we good with what the ACES requirements are, or are we not? Do those meet and resonate with people? I think that's a huge ask. I think there were other wins that we saw with being able to create a test that's specifically for someone in expanded learning to take as to become an employee versus having to take that higher level of the instructional aid. Some of that my staff will never do. But does that mean they shouldn't be able to work with kids? And so I think it's really being at the table, being present and listening and reading anything that we can about what's coming down the pike next, and see, hey, that might braid with us well on every level, because that's how that's unfortunately, I think that's how rules just have worked. Everybody's on the table for everything, and we're going to figure out how to get our last penny out of them because we want to have our kids have the best. And I think that has been our message. So I think as we look at that sustainability, those are things we really have to become friendly with, is what is coming in, and is there a spot where after school can meet a need for them?
I like the a couple things out of that. Relationships, I agree, are the most important thing, because it's amazing what happens when you have a good relationship. And then not being afraid to ask, because you just never know. I'm never afraid to ask for something when it's for my students or my staff or whatever. Myself, no, but when it's for them, I don't care. I'll ask for anything. One more point that I was thinking is with these tiny schools, when we're talking about braiding funds, oftentimes they just don't have anything. It is amazing where they would love to help or be willing to, and it's just not there. So I think we have to realize that it's not just that they're being stingy or whatever. It's just not there, especially if they don't have a high free lunch population, or if they are not a diverse community. They're not getting any extra anything.
Good point, Cindy. Very good point to raise. Well, I'm going ahead. I think we have some folks that in the audience. We'd like to open it up to you now. So if you would like to participate in asking a question or giving some information out, we would love to hear from you right now. So Jeff, how do we handle this?
I would say if any of the audience has questions, bring yourself off mute and go ahead and ask a question. We'll spotlight you if necessary. But yeah, this would be a great time. If you have any questions or follow-up items for the panelists or Gloria, this is the time to do so.
I have a question. A lot of the conversation is focused on sort of the higher level issues of rural programs. I'm curious about whether you all have things to say about sort of on a programmatic level, whether you think the programming for kids in rural areas should be different from, or how it should be different from kids who are in urban and suburban environments.
I'll take a first stab at that. Just in my support of all the programs, Katie, the first question that I normally ask is, how have you had conversations with youth and parents and your community about what you would like to see the program look like and feel like and sound like? There is no cookie cutter approach in any of our communities. And I think we run the danger of saying, I mean, we know we have our required program components for ELOP, for example, the homework and tutoring assistance and your academic enrichment, but how that looks and feels can really vary so greatly. I have a small program. I can give you a specific example. They do have good internet connections. So let me just put that out there. But they have hired and worked with, as a partner, an organization called Digital Nest, which is way over the hill and far away from where they are physically located. But they're taking advantage of some of the virtual opportunities. So they may have a staff member in the room, but trying to bring in some of those courses and classes to the students via the virtual experience, which is obviously not ideal. They all want their preferences in person. But in this particular case, there was a great need for career exploration and doing that at an earlier age, and saying, okay, we are in an agricultural community, and yet we want to expose our students to a wide variety of things. So how do we go about doing that if we don't have the resources to set up our own film, club or whatever? And so they partnered with a group called Digital Nest, and that organization is helping them to provide a wide array of career exploration modules. But it's cool because I think the mix can be a live, in-person, virtual, and then and then there's courses, of course, that follow. So, and maybe a in-person sort of situation when an individual can get out. So it's very much dependent on the program, and what's set up. But that's an example of this particular one that wanted to do more around career exploration and really expand students' horizons that way. I hope that helps.
And Katie, I was thinking about that. I see that Rachel's on here from the California Academy of Sciences. Thinking about that, and one of the things that we have done here is we utilize some of their curriculum. And so our kids, even if their internet's not wonderful, we have done phones, we've done all kinds of things to make sure that they got to visit their virtual space, because some of them will never get to a zoo, or they'll never get to the Academy of Sciences to see you know, all of the wonderful exhibits that they have, and to go to the top of the roof and look out over San Francisco and to see how things happen there. But I think it also was an aha moment, because it was like, oh, there's this free resource that anybody can use, and then we can braid it with curriculum topics that we're already using. So we've tried to utilize both that as well, that digital piece, to get them to the location. And then we've tried to look and see, and what we found is a lot of those places that have those digitals also have the curriculum free of charge on their website that you can pull down and use. So our students have visited a lot of places in America that they would have never have been to. And so I think it's that creativity piece again, that we look at. And yes, I believe that every student in our frontier and rural places should have the same opportunity to learn to play basketball from a professional. And so there's curriculum out there too, and there's people that will hop on and they'll do it. It just looks a little bit different. But I think you never stop looking. And I think that's been the thing that we've really encouraged our staff. They'll say, oh, I know we probably can't do this. And I'm like, why can't we? Let's find it. Let's engage someone there, you know, that we can. And a lot of times if we reach out to them, they're more than willing to help us. So I think for me, that's really the piece for that process, is really don't stop going and looking, because they should have the same curriculum. They should have the same accesses.
Again, I think we keep talking about that equity issue, right? And so even more so for our students who don't even have a bowling alley. Cindy.
I'm hearing this discussion, I just was thinking, wouldn't it be amazing if we could somehow arrange some sort of meeting or swapping so that us rural people could maybe go to a big site and say, hey, what are you guys doing? And wow. And then maybe they could come to our site, because, you know, at our site, we may have a farrier, a horseshoer person come and show the kids, you know, on a horse or whatever. And they would never, ever think of something like that. What are they doing that we would never, ever think of, that maybe we do have access to, and we just don't know it? So, you know, using all of us to kind of work together and get ideas, you know, to improve and make a better program.
And it goes back to what really inspired my ownership for my own education now, was expanding horizons. And that was in 6th grade. They called us a special group of students, and we were going into an enrichment kind of educational experience. And so every month they took us on a field trip. So I learned that trees were made into paper. And then the next month they took us and showed us how paper was made into newsprint. And I was fascinated and I was hooked. And so I took ownership for my own learning from that whole experience. And I think that's what we can do for our students even today. Okay, Katie, I hope that helps answer your question.
Thank you.
Great. I'd like to go to Julie Jarrett. And Julie, you can take yourself off mute and ask your question.
No, I just think that we need, a couple of thoughts. Many rules are K-8, which is a very unique programming opportunity. When you have TKers and 8th graders, and you oftentimes only have 2 staff because you have a small school population and limited funds, it's not an easy solve. You really have to be creative. You have to pull in as much community participation as possible. And a lot of urban and suburbans don't get that. It's a whole different animal. And kind of a little forward thinking, I think what might be nice to to consider doing sometime in the spring is possibly pulling together what I would consider, rural program innovators, individuals who have a passion for the rural voice, but also a passion for making sure that it's heard, and maybe sitting down and really going through the grant funding requirements, the program requirements, and really highlight those that are challenging for rural communities. And then not only discussing the things that are challenging, but coming up with possible solutions or language change to legislation to make it a little more appealing for rural communities to succeed in this type of endeavor. We go way back to the early 2000s, and when they started to discuss, the funding requirements, and the voices that were heard were the urban communities. And so staying open to six to create an opportunity for those in the LA area to commute home from work, which could be 60 to 90 minutes. In rural communities, that's not necessarily the case. Those students need to be picked up oftentimes far earlier because they may be commuting home for 60 minutes with a neighbor or a shared ride opportunity because they live so far out in the communities. So there's a lot of things that we need to come together as a group and really come up with some solid solutions to some of the issues and really be the voice in Sacramento and move forward.
Julie, I'm just gonna throw it out there to the group, but I think this would be a great follow-up to this webinar, is to take it to that next level where we actually are looking at the funding requirements and the program requirements and coming up with different verbiage, different language about what would meet better our needs in our rural programs. So thank you for doing that. I would like to challenge the group to be able to think in terms of that might be our next step.
Well, we know that works. We know we have prime examples of that work. And I think it's just that person bringing it up, like Julie just said, that's how we've made change.
Yep.
In the past, it's when we all got on the same page and we brought our urban and suburban friends with us. They'll tell the story for us too, because a lot of them will go, oh, that makes sense. And when they start supporting it, it changes also that other part of the dynamic, because now it's not just those smaller group of programs, it's the system saying this is important. So I hope that you will convene that group, and that'll be something that we can see happen.
And that goes back to Mara's point too, about, we're a family. We come together in a collaborative spirit because these are all our children. Okay. Mara?
Can I just piggyback on that, because Julie's point, it's so spot on. It's exactly the conversation I just had with one of my districts here in Region 5. They only have 2 staff members. And, it was a panicked call about, I don't know what we're going to do because we're sick and we don't have subs and we literally have to close. And am I going to get penalized for this? And yet they want to be there and want to provide the service. But I think this is where we really need to look at a holistic support for our rurals and frontiers that is really out of the box when we're thinking about not only the creative ways to find solutions, but also looking at what else do we need to advocate for outside of just ELOP funding and flexibility. Maybe it's how are we able to advocate for a higher FRPM percentage, for example, looking at eligibility for FRPM, because that the threshold is very, very low when you consider the cost of living in our California communities. I know we have 2 of the most expensive in Region 5 for cost of living, and that's why a lot of our folks live in the very rural communities, because that's the only place that they can afford. But guess what? They're commuting that hour and a half to even get to their jobs. So when you look at that, it's not just about the change in legislation or more money or higher, it's all of that, yes. But it's also looking at, and I've had to talk to one of our foundations and about their service area in terms of who or where their foundation funding supports. And they said, well, it's within a 50-mile radius. And I said, well, that's an interesting criteria. How are you defining the 50-mile radius, but then you're supporting this other institution down that's actually happens to be 60 miles away? Oh, well, I guess we could go 60 miles. And I said, well, the point is here is that you have communities who are literally commuting. So how can we actually expand the kind of support that you're offering to those communities that are your workforce, who are spending all those hours on the commute? And we didn't even talk about that as a challenge, but, you know, just looking at gas alone, right? So there's a multifaceted underlying and adjunct connected issues that really can either help or hinder our rural programs that we've also got to be looking at how we might be able to influence. So it's a connected strategy, it's a connected approach, it's all of that. And underscore relationships, because the only way that that change has happened is through our relationships and having the opportunity to talk about how these things are all interrelated so that we can influence change. So count me in. I want to be on that.
Definitely. I think that's a great next step.
Yeah, great next step.
Okay, anyone else like to have any final words on the panel? Or
I'll jump in. I just want to thank you all for convening this. I'm from the California Academy of Science, as James mentioned, our relationship, and it's just so helpful to hear from rural partners, even though we are an urban area, and that we do try to think about in a lot of our programming how to connect across urban, rural, suburban environments and really try to be a resource to a lot of different folks. I know one of the initiatives that we have here at the Academy is Thriving California. So how do we think about ourselves as a United State versus different communities within that? So I'm excited to continue the conversation and hear from everybody on the next call.
great, thank you, Rachel. Okay, Jeff, why don't you go ahead and put everybody, the panelists, their information. If anyone would like to follow up with any of the panelists, please feel free to do so. Here's their contact information. And I would just like to say thank you to our panelists, as well as for their insight and their inspiration today. And thank you all for participating in today's webinar. We will be posting the recording of today's session. You can visit the How Kids Learn YouTube channel to watch other prior webinars and share with staff. And you will be sent the slide deck as well as all of the information in terms of additional resources. And we hope to be in touch with you all and talk about the second step in following up with rural program innovators like Julie Jarrett has offered. And so you'll be hearing more from us. So thank you once again and have a great day.
Thanks.